Well, Afghanistan has been in the news, that's for sure. Sometimes sad, sometimes very tense, and sometimes heartrending. That's not going to be what Rick Magnani talks to us about today. He's going to talk about the other side of the picture, the happy, hopeful, and heartwarming side. So, Rick served as Chief of Party on the Regional Agribusiness Development North, funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. And he worked from March 2015 to January 2019 and continued to support the program until it closed in May 2019. The goal was to increase farm productivity and to lower production costs to more effectively compete in the international markets. So in addition to describing his work, he's going to share insights about the people, their culture, tribalism, security, and the influential role of the poppy. Well,
here we go. Thank you, Elaine, and thank you to the Library Committee for inviting me today so I can share my story about my time in Afghanistan. Right at the outset, and thank you for coming, right at the outset, this chief of party thing I've got to get straight because I get quizzical looks all the time about you're the chief of a party. It's just one of these almost archaic terms that USA likes to use and they have forever. Basically means you're running the program. That is what I did in Mazar-e-Sharif from, as Elaine said, from early March 2015 to late December and early January of 2019. Nearly 4 years. And so I managed this project called the Regional Agriculture Development Project North, RADP North for short. And it was a $78 million 5-year program, ended in May of 2019. And its main focus was to improve farmer productivity, raise their farmer incomes. There's a big problem there, more so in the South. The big problem was poor farmers, not enough money, they have an open ear, or so the thinking would be, to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the other bad guys. They wanted to slow that or stop that recruitment as much as possible. I joined the project after it began to replace the chief of party that just wasn't quite cutting it, and had a lot of changes to make initially. Got a lot done, and at our peak we had over 300 staff people. Mazar is here. We had regional offices in the other 5 pink-colored provinces there. And it's really difficult to see, but the crosshatched areas are the districts, 26 of them, within which we work. Promise, no death by power. This is the only slide, but I do have a couple videos that I think will be of interest to you. So I'm starting to think about this a while back. What topics do I want to highlight? The number one question that I would get from people outside of DAI was security. People at DAI, well, they know what they're getting into when they join DAI, which is the company I've worked with for 27 years until I retired this last December. And it was the security situation colors everything. Your social life or your lack of social life, the work environment. And even so, it causes a lot of stress, but even so, I never felt like I was in imminent danger. In part because we're in the north, much more calm than Kabul, which we, with a touch of black humor, used to call kaboom because so much crazy stuff was going on there. In black humor, it was essential to just shed some stress. And so part of the reason why I didn't feel in danger is we spent a lot of money on security. About 4.5% or so of our budget just on security, which is about half of what most other projects were spending, because we had DAI had 6 projects in the country, So we were able to split our costs, shift our overhead around, so it wasn't quite as costly. We had 3 expat security guys, a Brit, a Scotsman, and a Welshman. And those latter 2 guys, when things got excited, when something was going on, they'd start talking quick, virtually incomprehensible. Just, they cut part of the word at the end, and it really was maddening. But they were really good people. They exuded, well, ex-military, exuded confidence and calm. As I said, they get a little excited sometimes. But they would work on 2 months in, 1 month out. And then stagger it, so every month we had a different complement of 2 of them. They took very good care of us. We had safe rooms at we had 2 distinct buildings. Office, guest house, with safe rooms on the 3rd floor of both. And the concept was to delay the bad guys, so we had whatever the bad guys could be. Generally Taliban, but who knows what. So we had steel reinforced gates at the base of every stairwell, sealed off, of course. And then inside the gate leading up to the safe room, we had this big box, rawhide glove on it, filled with razor wire. So if things were breached, put the glove on, grab that razor wire, and jog up the steps. And then at the top of the steps, we had these big tubs of cooking oil. And we stripped the carpet off of those floors, so it was marble, so we dropped the oil, and that's supposed to make life miserable. Fortunately, we never had to do that. We didn't get breached, although there were a few tough moments, which I will mention shortly. Vehicles. We had Toyota Land Cruisers, armored, and knew those guys cost about $250,000 each. We had 4 of them, but we had hand-me-downs from other projects, so we didn't have to shell that money out. They were called B6s, which refers to the ballistics rating, and 6 means it's just 1 step above AK-47, so a little higher velocity bullet. But the operational word is resistant, not bulletproof. Because if you had a bad guy that knew how to shoot and put 3, 4, 5 rounds, nobody could ever be sure because we didn't want to test it, would penetrate a windshield or the body armor. So they were built and they were there for us to get us out of trouble, not to cocoon if something bad happened. And it worked. No problem. Now, right up north, I mentioned Kabul being kaboom, and it indeed was. Right up north was fortunate. Mazar is a relatively quiet place, far less traffic, far less polluted than Kabul. But the quietness, the better security was due primarily to the presence of Governor Atta. A tough guy, but a fair tough guy. He was there for most of my stay. And he skimmed, like I think all of the 34 provincial governors skimmed, but he was smart, paved roads, built schools, made sure households had potable water. In other words, he wasn't greedy. And best of all, from a security standpoint, he paid the local tribal leaders, the warlords, to keep the Taliban at bay. And it worked. Because we never had any, well, we did have one, sorry. We never had any little skirmishes. They just weren't a big problem. So but we had killings, but most of the killings were tribal-based, clan-based. When the Taliban took over from 96 to about 2001, there were conflicts at the beginning and at the end of that period. A lot of refugees split, mostly to Pakistan. Land records were destroyed. Refugees returned. They couldn't prove that they had that plot of land. So the people that came back, that had some money, that could hire the muscle, armed muscle, they would squat. Happened a lot. And if they did it to the wrong person, they'd get taken out. This was not common, but every 6-7 weeks we'd hear about a little firefight and people getting taken out. Mazar lost 2 prosecutors during the time I was there because they put, the word goes, they put the wrong guy in jail. And that was their revenge. Bribes go bad, somebody gets cut out of a poppy deal, killings. And to give you a sense of how cheap life is, from 2 different sources, the price for taking out, for killing someone was $100 without bodyguards, which I found interesting in another black humor sense. And the pricing scale was just crazy with the bodyguards, but it was almost scientific. But it happened. We had 1 Taliban incident during my time there. In November 2016, a massive truck bomb blew up in front of, at the gate of the German consulate in Mazar. It was about 2 kilometers from our guest house, not quite line of sight. It was 11 p.m. or so, and just nodded off to sleep. And this explosion jarred me awake. And seconds later, it was all a blur, really. The concussion blast comes, rattles the windows, rips plastic that we used to try to seal the windows so we didn't get dust and stuff. And the next thing I heard was Alex, our security guy, saying, "Get the F up into the safe room." Now, we were supposed to, when we did that, laptop, cell phone, ditty bag. Ditty bag had a change of clothes, toothbrush, all that kind of stuff, some deodorant, because who knows how long you're going to be up there, and $500 in cash or so. So what I do, setting a great example, put on my shorts, a t-shirt, no shoes, no socks, scampered up into the safe room, setting a terrific example. But I caught that, I just caught unmitigated grief for months after that. So we get up there. Alex was in the safe room with us. The other guy, security guy, was checking the perimeter. Alex hands me a shotgun and a box of shells. Hands Bill an AK-47. And third person a pistol. And then he says, "Here, get ready. I'm going to go out, lock behind me." And we're looking at each other. None of us knew what the hell to do with these things. No, and we did not have training. And that was an alarming, sobering moment. Shortly after that, I requested weapons familiarization training, which we finally got, so I was able to comfortably handle those 3 weapons. No live fire, though. I really wanted to shoot an AK-47, but the insurance company didn't like that idea, so they said no. The next day, we finally got cleared after about 40 minutes to leave because we found that it was just this single blast. We had to vary routes every day for security purposes, and that morning they said, "Can we drive by the consulate?" And of course the street roped off, so we couldn't drive in front of it, but we were close enough that we could see with people standing on the road just how big the diameter of that blast was. Just ginormous. And the facades on both buildings, or both sides of the street, not just the windows and the exterior cladding, but took out 3-4 feet of the building. And they had to condemn a lot of the buildings in that area. It was just crazy. Later that day is when I got the most nervous and uptight that I'd been in all my time there. We learned that the German Rapid Response Team at Camp Marlow, which is the international military force near the airport, and from that camp to the German consulate, maybe 15 minutes at breakneck speed. They had to clear with Bonn headquarters. It took them 90 minutes to get there. That's when I felt really alone, because I feel responsibility for this team. And I knew, and we were the only U.S. presence, official presence in the city. All other aid projects were in Kabul. We were unique. So if we got hit, I knew sure as hell that the Germans who ran the camp, had an international force there, were not going to be beating a 90-minute record to come save our guys. And that was one of those moments where it was, okay, you're either going to quit or you're going to just say, I got to deal with this and go on. And I was able to do the latter, but it was a couple of agonizing weeks. We also had the Indian consulate near our guest house got hit when I was on leave. 3 assailants got killed, and no one claimed responsibility. So it could have been a personal vendetta against Indians. We never quite could figure that out. And the security situation was getting progressively worse when I was there. 2019 Taliban incidences were the highest since 2010. And we get bulletins from the German military and from U.S. military. But what I relied on was our Afghan staff that would, the customary thing was you go visit the relatives or family even if you didn't want to. I mean, you just did it. It was absolutely demanded of you or you face shame. So they returned to the office and they'd always ask me, what's it like out there? It's getting worse. And to a person, it was getting constantly worse. Their fear was, and the Taliban would put in these impromptu checkpoints, and their fear was that the Afghan staff would be seen at one of our project functions, some field day out in the hinterlands or whatever. Somebody would recognize them, remember the face, goes to the village, this guy works for the Americans. And if that happens, it's either you get murdered or ransomed. But we were very fortunate it didn't happen, but it was a constant, I think, for them, and I understand it's a constant fear. I'll touch on this peace deal, this kind of sort of maybe peace deal at the end. I'm hopeful, ever hopeful, but I'm very skeptical. I'd like to turn to our living and working environment, which was pretty damn simple. Guest house, office, guest house, office. Every day we had access to 3 not very good restaurants in town. Security cleared them. Didn't do that. We had access to a carpet shopping area across from the Blue Mosque, which, by the way, please Google. It's a fabulous edifice. It's worth spending a few minutes reading about it and looking at the pictures. So, maybe once a month on a Saturday, a couple of us would go down to the carpet place with money that was just nowhere else to spend it. So you look and you buy carpets, and Michelle will attest that we've got more carpets than we do house. They're stacked up, but they look so pretty, don't they?
Yeah.
We had 3 cooks. This is so strange, I never figured out how this happened. They could do 2 things well: French fries and chocolate desserts. Chocolate cake was their specialty. And everything else, yeah, good, but I mean, casseroles, oil, salt, just overdone, overcooked meat, vegetables. So often bread, salad, French fries, chocolate dessert. That is not a healthy way to go. At least the lunches that was a guest house. Lunches at the office, they were a little bit better. We tried to train them. They'd change for 1, 2, 3 meals, and then they slide back, and so we gave up. Our guest house was what we called the Poppy Palace. A lot of villas were built on proceeds from poppy and heroin. Big, massive building, 12 bedrooms, dowdy, old, deep red carpet, deep red curtains needed for security, so it's always dark in there. Always a couple of mice. You had to watch where you left the food out. You didn't leave food out overnight. But we had the saving grace for me was the gym in the basement. Not a great gym, but we had a rowing machine, elliptical, and 2 treadmills and 3 weights. And I was religious about it because that was the only way to break stress other than drinking stupidly to excess, which couldn't afford to do. People. Interesting mix. We got Turkmen, Uzbeks, Tajiks from the stands, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. Yes, as you can see from that, pretty close. This is Tajikistan, perhaps around Uzbekistan, where the stands are north and west of that. And also a lot of Hazaras. That's a group that primarily from the middle area of the country, hilly area. Unfortunately, they were discriminated against. They just thought of kind of like lower middle, lower class. It was not good to see. Language in the north, Dari, tied into Farsi from Iran. Not the same, but very close. In the south, Pashto, influenced by Pakistan, which is right on the other side there. Practiced a very conservative sort of Islam, especially in the way that women are treated. And it's worse in the south with Pashto. A few examples of the women treatment really was galling to me. We had a gender specialist who got married shortly after I arrived. And 6, 5, 3, I can't remember, it's kind of blurry now. She started coming to the office with the old sunglasses and heavy makeup. And it was clear she was hiding bruises. And as I found out later, even though her family and his family agreed that he was beating her, her family still had to pay, I don't know how many camels, but at least a couple of camels at about $1,000 a pop to get him to sign divorce papers. It's awful. But then I got, it was one of those deer in the headlights moments when I'm having my exit interview with her. She was moving to Kabul because she was afraid that this jerk was going to stalk her. And she asked for a reference. I said, of course I'm going to help you whatever way I can. And she leans in, she says, Mr. Rich, everybody call me Mr. Rich. Isn't it customary for married couples to have sex on their wedding night? And what do you do with that? I mean, it was just one of those, oh, I can't say anything. I just remember ushering her out, but this was a woman that was screaming for help. And it was heartrending. Our poor grants manager, Tahira, another woman, was finding out shortly after her engagement that she was going to be wife number 2. And she'd come into the office and she was just couldn't hold it in any longer. She'd come in, she'd do what she could, because I told her. She'd sob, cry, and I felt completely helpless. I can't do a doggone thing for her. And all she would say, and that's how she felt, of course, miserable. Through the sobbing, she'd just say, things will never change. This is the way for Afghan women. Full stop. And that is why I was so, when I get to talking about work, why I was so enthusiastic about this one particular set of activities. We had access to a Western clinic in Mazar, small. We also had access to the camp, normal camp, emergency room, but the word was you had to be bleeding profusely or dying of struck by a heart attack. Failing that, medevac to Kabul, to the embassy emergency facilities, which were top-notch, or medevac to Istanbul. But local folk, Afghans, couldn't afford couldn't afford the Western clinic. The hospitals, they had trained nurses and pretty well-trained doctors, but the hygiene was so bad that the risk of any post-surgical infection was just terrible. So they fly to India. That was their way of getting medical medical care. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about corruption. Boy, it is everywhere. Transparency International, you've probably heard of this, in 2018 had Afghanistan ranked 172 out of 180. Next year, they dropped to a tie for 173, with only Syria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen worse than that. It is an accepted way of life there. It permeates virtually everything. You know, if it's a form of extortion, bribery, fraud, whatever, it's just there. And I got my first taste of it. I was in the country like 5 days, and we had to buy a backup generator. And because everything was, all our electricity came from diesel generation, we spent anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000 a month for diesel fuel. We had to have it. And you say procurement rules, you don't buy used stuff. It's got to be new. And the procurement manager comes up after, it's being delivered, he says, "Mr. Rich, we have a problem." So I go down and I see this clearly not new generator. This thing had rust on it, dents. Somebody had even taken a can of red spray paint. Did just a horrible job. Runs and splotches. And the guy, never forget, put his hand on his heart. He said, "Sir, on my mother's grave, this is new." This thing was damaged at the Pakistan border. And while true, I've seen new stuff get scratched and dinged because the handling facilities terrible at Pakistan border. But, it just, nope, bring us back a new one. Did the same bloody thing 2 weeks later, brought back another different color, not the same unit, at least he was smart enough to figure that out. Same routine, we didn't give him a third chance, of course. We ran into a lot of bait and switch. We bought, for farmers, we would buy pruning shears, hoes, wheelbarrows, stuff like that, to provide them during demonstration plots, which I'll discuss in a moment. So we put out a tender, guys would bid, companies would bid, bring in samples look good, and then of course, approve it, and they show up with a pile of Chinese junk. I mean, clearly just inferior crap. And it was an expected routine. They would push. Some of them expected to get caught, but it was so ingrained in the way they do business, they do it anyway. Nonplussed, completely. Why are you doing this to us? We'll fix it. Because they didn't want to get on our restricted procurement list or some such thing, where they'd be blackballed. They still needed the business, of course. Reached us internally, too. I had to fire 2 local staff that were steering business to a preferred vendor. And we had irrefutable proof. I mean, stupidly, he kept receipts in his desk. And when confronted with the evidence, one of the guys just continued to deny, and just showed him the door. Second guy starts bawling, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry. And then he asked for a towel so he could hide his face when he left because of the shame he felt. Nobody can see me in this corrupted state. It's accepted, but still, when you get caught, shame is just so integral to their way of living. You need to save face as much as you can. Very important. Final bit on corruption. Sharif, our facilities fellow, he made sure the ACs and heaters were working properly. He left in '96 when the Taliban took over. He left to join family in Vancouver, Canada. And when things cleared up in the early 2000s, he returned and realized that he had left his bachelor's diploma behind in Kabul. It was lost. So this was from Kabul University. It was still standing. Amazingly, his professor was still there. And so he went back and talked to his professor about getting this replica, or duplicate, sorry. And the professor says, well, you know all the records were destroyed. So he says, yeah, we figured that. He said, therefore, $3,000, I will give you your bachelor's diploma. And then, for $5,000, I'll give you a master's degree. I'll promote you. So he decided that he didn't need the promotion. So he haggled over the $3,000. I don't know how much he got it down, but he said, Mr. Rich, I have to have that. And I understood it. But I tell you what, after that, every time I would be involved in interviews, which would be for almost every position outside of drivers and cleaners, and look at those degree statements, and just wonder how real. And we got the wool pulled over our eyes constantly. And they'd walk on water on paper, and they'd come in, and a minute and a half into it, you realize you've been duped. It's just the way they had to operate. Now, a little bit about our work. We worked in, as I said, increasing productivity to raising costs. We worked in wheat, sheep and goats on the livestock side, and on high-value horticulture, grapes, raisins, melons, and tree fruits and nuts. And the big method we used was these demonstration plots, where, for example, with wheat, we set it up so, okay, farmers, on this half, you plant your usual local wheat variety. You plant it the way you usually do, which is to broadcast it, just throw the seed out. And on this side, we're going to have the improved variety using a mechanical seed drill that puts the seed 5 centimeters or whatever the heck it is, and gives a little microdose of fertilizer right next to the seed. And then we're all going to reconvene midway through the year, or midway through the season. So you can look at it, and then they come back at harvest time, and then you harvest, thresh it, weigh it, and pencil it out. And it's always more expensive to buy the better seed and use the mechanical seed drill, but it nets out because your income is that much higher because the yield is so much higher. And so we use that process, and a lot of farmers would accept it, and a lot would say, it's still too conservative. I won't do it. I'll let a couple of my neighbors do this for 3 or 4 years, and then just maybe. Much conservatism. And I mentioned earlier one of the very exciting things I was dealing with. Oops. Sorry, I showed your dog. We also worked in health and nutrition, hygiene, health and nutrition. We trained 8,000 women, a little over, on 10-course curriculum, on basic rudimentary hygiene, sanitation on the household, and very importantly, how to prepare more nutrient-rich and diverse diets for the household. The target being, you may have heard of the first 1,000 days with nutrition, the idea from conception to the third birthday, that 1,000-day period is critically important to cognitive development. If you don't feed the child in utero and after, give them the right nutrition, brains don't develop, and that's lost forever. And it's a very serious problem in the developing world. So, after we did that training, then we took a subset of the 8,000 and planted and helped them plant home gardens, little patches near their house, all vegetables, and then trained them in simple recipes to use the vegetables, more dietary diversity, and more nutrition-rich stuff, food. So what I'm going to do is, this is one of the videos that we put together. 2.5 minutes, I think.
Ito برای انکشاف بین‌المللی ایالات متحده جهت بهبود مسئولیت اقتصادی و غذایی برای افغان‌های روستایی در شمال افغانستان فعالیت می‌کند. شیوه‌های تغذیه مناسب با بهبود مسئولیت غذایی و زندگی اقتصادی در خانواده‌ها همراه است. ارزیابی ملی تغذیه سال 2013 نشان داده که میزان سوی تغذیه نسبت به ارزیابی سال 2004 بهبود یافته، ولی هنوز هم این میزان بالا است. این ارزیابی همچنان نشان داده که مشکلات صحی قابل جلوگیری ناشی از تغذیه نادرست مادران قبل و نتیجه بارداری میباشد.
پیش از اینکه دیگران میریم اول آشپزخانه را خوب شروع کنیم پاک کنیم.
با عنوان نتیجه گیری آموزش در حفظ الصحت، تغذیه و دهقانی برای توانمندسازی زنان با دانش مؤثر برای تغییر رفتار به منظور تهیه و تامین غذای مفید به خانواده‌هایشان مورد نیاز است. برای جوابگویی به این نیازها امسال به تعداد 3250 خانم در 4 ولایت بلخ، سمنگان، جوزجان و بغلان از دانش حفظ الصحت و تغذیه بهره مند خواهند شد. این آموزش ها باعث توانمند ساختن خانم ها شده تا در زمینه های حفظ الصحت، تغذیه، دهقانی آنها به شکل موثر سهم گیرند و باعث ایجاد آگاهی از تغذیه درست گردیده که منجر به تغییر مثبت رفتار در اشخاص و جامعه می‌گردد.
چیزای زیاد را فهمیدیم و 8 درس خواندیم. مثلا زنجیر آب پاک فهمیدیم چطور آب صحی میشه. وقتی که آب جوش بدیم آب صحی است و همچنان در ظرف پاک باید بندازیم و اون ظرف هم باید سرپوش داشته باشه و همچنان گروپ های غذایی را فهمیدیم. دسترخوان از ما همیشه باید ترکاری و چکر و چیزان باشه تا که بدن از ما همیشه صحتمند باشه.
این آموزش ها نقش گزینه‌های دهقانی را با تاثیر آن بالای تغذیه خانواده ها پیوند می‌دهند. همچنان خریده های ذخیره‌سازی اصلاح شده را به آنها معرفی می‌کند که یک طریقه ارسال و ساده ذخیره‌سازی مواد غذایی بوده و ضایعات پس از حاصلگیری را کاهش می‌دهند.
بچه‌ها شستشویی نداشته بود، مقصد نگاهی صحیح نداشته بود. هر روز مریض میشد دکتر میرفت، هر روز مریض میشد دکتر میرفت. یک ماه پیشتر اینا آمده که همین درس‌ها رو داره، همین طفلا که همین غذا رو میخوره، مادرایشان همین گرم نگاه میکنه، پاک نگاه میکنه، صفا نگاه میکنه، بیرون برآمدن نمیمونه، طفلا نیم مریض میشه دیگه میشه.
این آموزش ها همچنان موجه به ارتقای ظرفیت اشتراک کنندگان شده تا پیام‌های موثر تغذیه را با جوامع خود شریک سازند و سطح آگاهی جامعه را در مورد مشکلات شایع صحی که به دلیل تغذیه نادرست وقوع می‌یابد بالا برده و مهارت‌های لازم برای پیشگیری این مشکلات را به وجود می‌آورند.
USAID regulations that when you do anything in the field, you have to show this logo. The problem is we got a blanket waiver because Kunduz, one of our 6 provinces, was really the most restive, difficult province to work in. And people wouldn't come if they said that logo was going to be shown. I can't blame them at all. So we were able to get the approval not to use that. This program I was most proud of. All of the activities Red Up North was involved in. It hit home for me the hardest. And I was very proud that when we did our final assessment evaluation, all the home gardens that had been established from years 2, 3, and 4, at the end of year 5, just under 90% of them were still being tended, which is, I think, a remarkable achievement. I mean, I tip my hat to the great team that did the training, both on the hygiene side and showing them how to make food, and use the vegetables in the right way. Poppy, you mentioned this, Elaine. Wow, a difficult topic. I understand why farmers grow it. It is many times more profitable than wheat, grapes, raisins, melons, livestock. These folks are poor, they need money. I get it. But it's really difficult. And during my time there, the amount of poppy being grown, the amount of land being devoted to poppy increased dramatically. It was really a shame. USAID and some of the other donors, by donors I mean JICA, Japan, USAID from Australia, CETA, Switzerland, CETA with a C, Canada, the EU, put money, not all of these guys put money into this particular project, but during the conflict, when the Taliban were kicked out in 2001, a lot of irrigation infrastructure in the south just got blown up. So USAID and other donors decided, hey, let's turn the desert, let's rebuild that infrastructure, and let's get an opportunity for people to grow things again. And so you know where this is headed. The unintended consequence was, oh yes, they turned it into valuable, productive land, but they didn't grow wheat, and they didn't raise sheep and goats. It was poppy. And that was a very difficult, in the south, it was a very difficult thing to control. You just couldn't go in readily and rip the stuff out. So it's bigger in the south. You might have heard of Nangarhar and Helmand province. That's where it's really big. But it's also, it was also increasing in the north. And in near the end of the 2018 period, my boss in Kabul said, please send a team out. We're getting word that it's growing like crazy in the north. And please confirm or refute. And we couldn't do an extensive, comprehensive survey, but we did find this. There we go. I do like the dog picture. Okay, this red stuff is this is field after field. It used to be wheat or rice on the side. So it just exploded. Now, when you get to the end, you see a building, you can see it very well. Sarosh was in the car taking this video as they were rolling along, and suddenly the driver said, whoops, that place was a police station. And Sarosh, of course, freaked out, I don't blame him, dropped the phone, get it out of view, because he was concerned that it's pretty darn obvious that the police were aware of poppy being grown out their backyard. And so, whether they were part of it or just turned a blind eye, no one knows, but money had to exchange hands. There's no question about it. And the word on the street was that Atta, the governor I spoke of, if he wasn't outright supporting it, he at least sanctioned it by not sending out the army or the police force to destroy the crop. And it's not just the Taliban that are profiting from poppies. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and tribal warlords that just have a piece of the action that they got their little kingdom and they're making a lot of money by doing this. It won't be gone anytime soon. Two final thoughts. This peace agreement, this peace deal. As I said, I'm skeptical. Maybe something good will happen. But recall that this was between U.S. and the Taliban. No ISIS involved, no Al-Qaeda. And now the Afghan government is trying to work with the Taliban. So the original agreement called for complete U.S. military withdrawal 14 months, nearly 9,000 troops down in 135 days. That would be like 125 maybe. Prisoner swaps, that's the big hang-up now between the Taliban and the Afghan government. Taliban renouncing Al-Qaeda. And so, can Magnani, the president, and the Taliban leader put this issue of quickly doing these prisoner swaps aside, I don't think that's going to happen. And then we've got Ghani on one hand, and the number 2 guy in the election, Abdullah, who's called the CEO, which is a real strange way to, you don't want to be called vice president, because it indicated that he wasn't quite as powerful. So it goes. They're at loggerheads often, and he's talking about creating a separate government, which is a bluff, but it puts pressure on the deal. Taliban they're saying now, and they've said for a couple of days now, hey, we can't control Qaeda, we can't control ISIS. These other warlords that are balding poppy, they can't control them either. So, what's going to happen? Anybody's guess. I wish I had a good crystal ball, but I do not. So, one final thought. Without getting political, I do not want to get political, and I won't. I want to just put out a thought about, is the investment worth it? Is this, and I'm not talking about military at all, but development assistance, is it worth it? Because I've heard people say respectfully, I think you're wasting your time, and I think the U.S. is wasting a lot of money. And I understand that point of view, but I'm sure you all know this, but it bears repeating. The USAID budget, 2019 was $16.8 billion. The U.S. total budget, $4.41 trillion, or 0.4% of the U.S. budget is going to USAID. I'm sure you've read before, we're skeptics or people that think it's a terrible idea. We're saying, oh gosh, we're spending 5-7% of our total budget. Just not the case. It's a lot of money, but not relatively so. So I want to believe that in our small corner, oops, not up there, the map, our small corner of Afghanistan, we did a lot of good. Especially, again, that pride I have for the women's training and the home gardens helping children. But the nut is that going to be sustainable? And the only way you find that out is wait 2, 3, 4 years, go back and do a survey. But USA doesn't work that way, and I understand the difficulties of doing that. I like to think it will be. But to say that we shouldn't do foreign aid of that sort, development assistance, my favorite retort to that is what Jim Mattis, the ex-Secretary of Defense, said, if you cut this kind of foreign aid, I got to buy more bullets. And I believe that. And with that, happy to answer any questions you got. I ran on a little bit, sorry folks.
A few questions. Number one, I am friends with a gentleman who's in the Army who was assigned to Iraq for one or 2 years, and I asked him about the loyalty of the Afghan police and the Afghan Army. And basically he said that it shifts from day to day, week to week, month to month, depending upon who's in charge, who gets paid, and that it appears as though that from the standpoint of running the government, that the power really resides, in the tribal warlords and so forth, because their society is arranged on the basis of tribes and nationality, not a sense of national unity.
True.
If that's correct. And the other thing that people tend to forget, and I'm really worried about, is that if the Taliban is successful in taking control of Afghanistan, what happens to the women? What happens to the westernized women? I mean, they all turn back to chattel.
Yeah.
And so no more
Scary.
education, no more independence. You know, they're covered up in service of those their husband or father. And people don't realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I comment?
Yes.
Okay. Well, on the second point, women are virtually powerless. For example, women legally have the right to own land and movable assets. But what invariably happens is, so when a woman marries, it's customary for her to sign her titles over to her husband, her father or her brothers, because the idea is she's going to be cared for by her husband. And if he dies and wants to divorce her, if the assets remain with her family, then his clan, his group, family, can't control that asset. So the woman comes back to the family, she's cared for, and everything's good. And that is so embedded that the amount of shame if a woman doesn't do that, to sign the assets back, is incredible. It's according to my Afghanistan. It's just not done. First comment about the Afghan police and the army. We had quite a few APPF, Afghan Provincial Police Force, and I just could never be certain whether those guys would cut and run or not, or support us. A lot of critics say that we installed, with Ghani, well, before Ghani, we tried to install a Western-style democracy centralized in a country, as you say, was based on decentralized tribal units, clan units, and we were shoving a square hole into a round peg, and it's not working. And that's the struggle that they're facing now. I just don't know if it is workable. I don't know what the solution is, but you got to have agreement in the districts and in the provinces, or whatever the central government says, that just do it. Does that come close?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, please.
I'm not sure that I understood. Did the project end? And if so, because that's what I thought you said that the project hit its end. Why?
Well, it was a 5-year project, started in May of 2014, and so we had 5 years, and we still have money left over, and we applied for what they call a no-cost extension, and USAID turned us down. It was a not bittersweet, it wasn't sweet at all. It was a bitter moment because I wanted to continue. It was too bad it missed.
So I have a question related to what you just asked. You have demonstration gardens,
Yeah.
which use modernized wheat
Yeah.
of some sort, and compared it to the natural
Right.
wheat over there. So whenever this is all over, that wheat costs a lot of money to purchase. So how do people who are not going to continue with the wheat fields, what source would they have for even buying that wheat seed? And why isn't the native vegetation, the wheat from the area, why isn't that sort of encouraged to develop and plant? So it's not overall costly to grow the plants.
Well, there are yield limitations. I completely understand your question, because what we call these local varieties that have been around for generations, they're termed land races, because most of the time a seed, as long as it's not a hybrid seed, you get good yields this year, you save the seed, you get decent yields, and then 3, 4, 5 years, it starts to decline. Land races have stabilized, but at a moderate level. You don't get huge yields, whereas the modern improved varieties give you far greater yields. And yes, the cost is higher, but it is available. So as I said, we penciled this out after the demo class to say, yeah, it's going to cost you 30% more inputs required in this improved approach, but your yield will be more than commensurate. So total revenue will increase 10, 15, 20%.
So they actually do have access to some of the.
Oh, yeah.
And going on with that, I was kind of surprised that there was some water, is there plenty of water natural there? And I understand why it has to be clean and so on, but I was viewing this as a desert sort of area, and limited amount of water there.
Now, there's a series of canals, and I don't know what the ratio of irrigated to rain-fed or non-irrigated land is. And you do better, get better production results from irrigated land. You're more non-irrigated, you're more dependent on nature. I would say roughly 40% of the wheat land in the north is irrigated. The rest is not. It's a real burden to farmers that don't have access to those canals. So yes, it is a problem in many areas. Something else? Yeah.
Mr. Rich, could you explain or have knowledge of how the opium is processed, how it is moved from farmer's field to the world market? How does it get out of Afghanistan?
Wow. I got a book that I can give you. I haven't read it yet. And underground labs, hidden labs, you know, they get the poppy out, they go through a little process and get the tar, and then, I don't know if they distill it. I'm profoundly ignorant about this stuff. But they've been doing it for a long time. And so they got pretty good, proven methods for doing it. The transport links, I mean, I know a lot, I've heard a lot goes through Istanbul, Dubai. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. It is a real interesting and complex issue.
But they service the world.
Oh gosh, yes. That's why they're still making tons of money.
Yeah.
You can always watch the movie The French Connection.
The body of the Ford something or other.
Yeah, that was all in Europe.
Yeah, it was. So, oh yes, ma'am.
I agree that it's necessary to have all this food production and all the work that you did, but if aid were to go bad, US aid were to go bad, wouldn't they need the military presence to protect them? Could they just go independently, or would it be continuing, quote unquote, the war with the military because they have to stay?